Morning.
Morning, guys. Morning. You got nothing but good stuff. So the last 2 or 3 weeks, last 2 or 3 weeks has been fantastic. I've been on the edge of my roof for the last 3 weeks.
Don't look.
Do it.
No, I know. Yeah,
Facebook can help.
Wishful thinking.
yeah, last 2 days, big deal. January was a disaster. What's that? Yeah. And that, we always, that New Horizons fund from Little Folks. When that's going good, it's going good. When it tanks, it tanks. I call it my roller coaster. Or my white knuckle fund. Yeah, we're thinking about that.
I don't know what
Good morning.
No, that's absolutely multitasking, okay?
Can't do that.
Right.
Hey, Chris. Do it fast.
I should quit.
In fact, if I was a bad, you will want to do a very quick presentation and exit stage right.
That's sentiment for next quarter.
Yeah, okay. That's right, this is a little bit lagging here, to be honest.
At 8 o'clock, call the Finance Administration Committee meeting to order. Melissa, roll call.
Keith Dirk,
Here.
Steve Brunner,
Here.
Tom Moll will be absent, John Gallen will be absent, Craig Porter.
Here,
And Bill will act as an alternate when Greg has to leave, so we have a quorum. Public comment.
I'll be very short because you have a lot of on the agenda. So
Appreciate
first of
that.
all, yes, first of all, you know, I want to commend that we're starting to have agendas available over there and over there. And however, I still think that we can do better, you know, communicating so that people, when they come, they can understand. Like, for example, I'll just give a quick example. I don't know what down on the other side of the agenda is the social media policy that's going to be discussed. I don't see anything wrong about, you know, letting us know what is that policy that's going to be discussed so we can comment on that, or anybody. So, of course, it's understandable that some subjects, you know, cannot be, but something like that, there's nothing wrong with attaching the proposed social media policy. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, just so you know, I mean, the social media policy is going to be discussed at this meeting, but then a recommendation will be made to council.
I'm aware.
You have
I'm aware of
between now
that,
and
but
next Tuesday to.
But
Review
that's
it.
the whole point of you know, participating into the discussion. Once the recommendation is done, comments at the council, you know, they become too many. Anyway,
Still a public comment before the council meeting.
yes, but you know what I mean. Anyway,
Yeah, okay.
go ahead.
All right, guys are up.
Okay. Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Pleased to be here again following another good year in the market. And you want to flip to the little commentary sheet, you know, right after the headline there. Gerard issues these insights, usually quarterly basis, kind of recaps some of the prior periods. And the picture there is the Chief Investment Officer for Gerard Management, Tim Chubb. So you know, Barry works with Tim closely, serves on a number of committees, you know, internally with, you know, mutual fund selection and investment policy committees. So Tim, you know, if you have a chance, Gerard does put out invites for market commentary, you know, little webinar, 5, 6, 8 minute things. And if you have a chance, if you get an invitation, you know, listen in. Tim, if you listen to him for 2 minutes, you're like, there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that you're like maybe not thinking about or hearing about on mainstream media. And Tim is super tuned in and super smart with that stuff. So it gives us, even myself, a little bit perspective on different things. So anyway, 2021 now is we're on a 3-year roll with this market expansion following the big dip in the first quarter of 2020 for COVID. So 19, 20, and 21, that 3-year period, I think it's been the best 3 years in recent memory, probably since the 90s. So just taking a look at some of the major averages there, U.S. equities, large cap, mid 20% returns. Last year, though, what was a little unusual, the bond market turned negative. And, inflation picked up. We all are familiar with that and seen that in the news. Interest rates did start to tick up, and now the Fed has signaled that there will be additional increases. They will start raising the short-term borrowing rate, probably in March. And it's unknown, there's odds. Wall Street has all these odds that, what percentage increase will happen in March, and then in June and September. It's kind of all over the map, but increasing interest rates are in our near future. So bond positions, will likely be under continued pressure and may only be flat this year. And if you recall, before COVID, bond portfolios were generating 4, 5, 6, 8% a year in some cases. So, but bond position is still, we need that as part of the asset allocation. We need that for safety and security when the equities start to correct, which we saw in January recently. So, Barry, any other, I mean, talk about inflation a little bit?
Yeah, the last 2 paragraphs, Tim talks about inflation. It's been on the agenda for the investment committee. We've been looking at it since the Fed said it was transitory, which obviously it wasn't. But that's the main thing that we're looking at. And what we're looking at in the portfolios is that if the Fed does raise rates 4 times this year, what we're looking at is the difference between value and growth funds. A lot of your growth funds, the major part of why you're buying those growth funds is for future earnings. A lot of companies are plowing money back into the company, these cloud companies, and it's the future earnings that everybody's looking at. And when there's inflation, all of a sudden the discount rate becomes greater, net present value of those earnings aren't as high. So that's why you're seeing pullback in the tech sector. So what we're looking at is moving from those growth funds, not 100% because we want to remain diversified, but to have a little bit more of a defensive position, bring in like Vanguard Equity Income, funds that do well when there's a pullback and fear of inflation, raising rates. As far as the bond portfolio, well, the aggregate bond index was down 1.5% last year, and your sleeve of fixed income, your bond holdings were flat to 0.5% positive. And the reason for that is that we do have a Janus multi-sector bond fund, which doesn't just invest in treasuries or just corporates. They're very tactical. They'll move into bank loans when they're favorable. They'll move into sovereign debt when that's favorable. And also, the Brandywine corporate credit bond fund was up 3% last year, and that's considered high yield. What we like about it is it's just one step below investment grade, so it isn't the junk, and it has shorter maturities. So if you do have a company that's being downgraded by S&P, the maturity is just, it's shorter, so it's not going to be as volatile. You can hang on to it, and you can trade it in for par value at the end of the coupon. So that's the main thing that we're looking at, and we'll take a quick look at the police pension plan. See, fourth quarter was a good quarter, 3.82% compared to the benchmark of 4.16, and for the year, slightly below the benchmark at 12.47.
One of the reasons for that was that fourth quarter, we did see a pullback in the small cap area. So holdings like the T. Rowe Price, New Horizon, they did pull back. And that was one of the reasons. Yeah. So, as Ron was mentioning, with the 3-year window, averaging over 10%, probably 13% for the 3 years. You can see that the fourth quarter, as far as the deposits, 355. I believe that your MMO and state aid, I was always looking for a huge number there, but you just do dollar cost average, your state aid and MMO. You see the asset allocation model, and with the police, at the end of the quarter, one of the things that we're looking at also was reducing real estate. We believe that with the interest rate hikes coming, mortgage rates, we're already seeing mortgage rates going up. In previous environments like this, the real estate did not do well. Your REIT holdings did 40% last year. So we felt that it was a good time to start pulling that down. So we went from that 3% to 1%, and that was right at the end of the quarter. So we do them a little bit at different times. The non-uniform and firefighters were reduced this quarter, but we got the police right at the end of the quarter. What we do then is, just so you can take a quick look at the funds and how they're rated, instead of having a huge Morningstar spreadsheets, we use FI 360, and they're an independent company, much like Morningstar, that rates stocks and ETFs and mutual funds, and we'll take a quick look at the holdings. You see the first is the large blend, and the Prime Cap Odyssey stock fund. I talked about it, I believe, every time I was here. The first quarter of 2020, when the pandemic hit, this fund was down, I believe, 10% more than the S&P was down. And the reason for that was that it held some airline stocks. So when we talked to the manager, the two managers have been written up in Morningstar as two of the premier managers. Barron Magazine had articles on them. So we held on to it, and it turned from red now to yellow. It's been performing very well since the pandemic. That year, 2020, it was one of the best performers after the pullback. We'll just quick go down to where we see some areas. The Eaton Vance Atlantic Capital SMID. We are replacing that fund. We do have requests in right now with Nationwide for Baird Mid-Cap. And all of Gerard, through various different analysis, selected. Actually, we went through every mid-cap fund there is. We came up to 5. The top that's green at the top. We interviewed all 5 managers, and we selected Baird Mid-Cap. It's one of the only mid-cap funds that has less standard deviation and higher returns in that 3, 5, and 10-year period, and that's what we look for. Less risk, hopefully higher return than the benchmark. Oh, and yeah, I was just going to mention that also, in that large value, Columbia Dividend Income and JP Morgan Equity Income, they close. So generally when a fund is doing well and they're ranked well, a lot of money starts coming in, and for the manager to be able to handle the money flows, once they get up there in the high billions, they close the fund to new investors, and those two close. Right now, we're looking for replacements for new funds, because new funds can't get into them. You can see the JP Morgan mid-cap and the American Century mid-cap value areas are doing well. The foreign large blend, Artisan International Value, see that it is in the middle of the road for the short period, but the 3-year rolling return is higher than average. We did select that fund in the beginning of the year, and it did outperform the benchmark this year. See, the international is an area that we've done really well in, outperforming the benchmark by a couple hundred basis points. You can see the Invesco International Small, it's a closed fund. The T. Rowe Price International Discovery, they closed. And WCM Focused International Growth, we got in approximately a year and a half ago. They just closed their doors and will not allow new investors in also. And actually, for the bond holdings, you see that the Cohen Steers, top rated fund with zeros. The Brandywine Global, again up 3%, when the benchmark is down 1.5%. You can see Double Line Core Fixed Income. This is the fund that's our core holding. It has an equal weighting of 6%, but we wanted a core bond holding because it does hold some treasuries, much like the index does. But when there's fear in the market, when there's pullbacks in the market, people move into treasury. So we want that one core holding, and that's our Double Line. You can see the Janus Henderson multi-sector income that I had mentioned, and we use the principal short-term cash. And just a scatter plot then showing where all the funds fit, and we like to see them all within that red mark. We do have the Odyssey Stock Fund, the Eaton Dance Fund outside the red, and that's the fund we're looking to replace. So, as far as movements in the portfolio, we're not really looking to add different funds. I did mention Vanguard Equity Income Fund, but that's an area of what we're looking to do is to move from growth. We're overweight growth at the present time. We're looking to overweight value. Anybody have any questions?
Go to the next sheet. Yeah, in all three plans, similarly invested, the returns are slightly different because of cash flows. We talked about that each time, so I think the non-uniform is just a little bit below the police there. And same thing for the firefighters. Firefighters is a smaller plan, and actually it had positive cash flow, but because of the timing of when monthly benefits are made and whenever that happens during the market cycle, it was slightly lower than the other two.
Firefighters always seems to be where the problem is, for some reason, I don't know why.
Yeah,
You know?
just different composition, different demographics, you know.
But he's not using the referral.
Challenge.
There you go.
It's a little more of a challenge, but yes. And I think part of the funding target has been or will be to focus on the firefighters plan maybe a little more than we have before.
Great, well, thank you.
He's in the right direction.
It's always a lot easier when it's easier to market, better
Yeah.
news, right?
Yeah, so of course, January, you've all seen, NASDAQ fell 15% roughly. The other indexes are down, double digits. We're in correction territory. It's actually come back, at least half of where, the last 2 days of January were 2,000 points on the Dow. So,
Facebook came out.
It's on an hour from now.
yeah.
Well, that's because they announced the inflation rate again, I guess, for
So-
January.
Did I hear this morning they were down 22%?
Yeah.
22, is that what it was?
So it's going to be a little more volatile. But as I said earlier, as folks are walking in, we're in the middle of the 2-year actuarial cycle, so if there's going to be a correction, we like it to be in the middle, like we're at right now, and the balance at the end of this year is what's important. And what's nice is with having 12, 13% last year, we're almost at our target. This year, if it's anywhere positive, we'll be grading above your assumption. So,
Great, well, thank you.
11 months.
Oh,
One last thing, if you don't mind, I'd like to introduce Lisa Ashcroft. She's joining us. Came into Univest from another financial institution about a year or so ago. She works over here on Rocky Drive, behind the restaurant.
AJ Monahan.
Monahan's. Okay. And Lisa is in our wealth division as a wealth advisor. But I thought I would introduce her, and it might be an opportunity for us and you to offer to your employees maybe some financial planning or financial advisory services, should they be interested. We could maybe have a group meeting, do a little pension provision review, and then, you know, have Lisa maybe talk to some folks. Completely voluntary, at your discretion, but she's a good resource. She has she works with a lot of individual clients, and might be something that you want to avail yourself of.
You got one down there.
I hope to answer some of the bigger questions of, like, you know, do I have enough to retire? Am I saving enough? What's gonna happen if it drops, you know, if we're in this correction and it lasts for 2-3 years? So basically all of this, but how does it apply to your own personal situation? And so I work a lot just with one-on-one, which is a lot less intimidating than this one. I'm happy to get back to it. But,
Biggest question I always have every day is why.
Why?
You know,
Why is it doing it?
Why is it?
Why is it up? Why is it down? Yeah. I know.
Why?
That's something they wanna consider, Michelle, put out there and see what interest level there is, and
Because we'll work in all stages, so the beginning and making sure you're putting enough away, then growing it, planning for it, protecting it, and then passing your wealth, the whole life cycle, so.
I would think, being that we have a good number of employees that in the next 5 to 7 years will be effectively reaching retirement age, that's something they would appreciate.
I'm gonna leave my business card,
Okay.
and if they can reach out, free consultation
right.
too, if they wanna just, you know.
Yeah, like I said, if you want to do a group meeting, you know, some of our other clients have like a benefits day where, you know, different providers come in and talk about, we'd be happy to do that, go over provisions and link that together. It's up to you, you know, your format, but, happy to do it. So, okay.
thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're up, Phil.
All right, next on the agenda is the first quarter MMO, where we're talking about pension.
Approve that deposit.
All right. The MMO that was approved in the fall of '21 for '22 totaled $778,000. The state aid is estimated at a unit value of $4,700 based on the amount that was received in 2021. Just certified units for '21, they total 85 units. So the state aid that is estimated to be received in the fall is $399,000. That would leave a gap between the MMO, or minimum obligation, and the amount that the state will provide to fund that of $378,000. In order to meet that obligation, it will be partially fulfilled by the defined contributions that are computed and made with each payroll for the more recently hired employees. That would still leave a gap that I'm suggesting that we fund over a quarterly basis, as has been past practice. So at this point, I'm recommending a first quarter MMO contribution totaling $74,499.50, split among the plans as you see there.
And what did we budget?
We budgeted the MMO, that is a requirement that we budget the amount that was
But we
computed.
budgeted contributions at like $75,000.
We budgeted $778,498.
Right,
Okay, just by comment, I've highlighted the $42,000, which is a defined contribution for the non-uniform plan. That is based on wages, and those wages, when we approved the MMO in the fall, included the wages of the former borough manager. Since he's no longer here, those wages aren't here, and that contribution corresponding to the wages won't be made. So I've reduced the amount that was originally approved at $54,000, and made it 42,000, which means the gap left for the employer to make up to meet the MMO has slightly increased.
If there are wage adjustments throughout the year, will that not fluctuate then to some
Well,
degree?
we will reevaluate when we get to the fourth quarter as we did in 2021. We'll compare the contributions that have actually been made to what was budgeted, and we can make an adjustment with that fourth quarter. We also make an adjustment because we don't know exactly what will be received in state aid.
Right.
It's only an estimate. Last year, the unit value went down from the previous year. In 2021, the unit value was $4,797, I believe. So being conservative, the estimate was 4,700 applied to the certified units.
When do they announce that?
We received that in September, and that we learn of the unit value at the time it's being dispersed.
My only thought would be is, do we want to continue to be a little more conservative, keep it at a higher number now and then adjust it lower in
Well, by
Q4 versus,
reducing the amount that I anticipate contributing with defined contributions with each payroll, I'm upping the portion that is covered by the employer.
okay, so there, we've got to recommend to council. Do we have a motion to recommend to council to make the first contribution at $74,409.50?
I have a question.
Questions?
Yeah. What is gap liability?
That's the difference between the MMO and what we anticipate in state aid. It's a gap. It's the amount we need to make up. You can call it anything you want. There's nothing official to that.
Right.
Nothing.
But we budgeted the MMO, we didn't budget any additional.
We budgeted the MMO because we were well funded, and Ron did not recommend additional funding.
But now we have a gap.
No, we always have a gap. The amount of state aid is never sufficient to meet the MMO. So the borough has to make up the difference. That's happens every year.
The gap's being funded by the $74,499 per quarter.
I understand that, but did we anticipate that in the budget?
Yes,
Yeah.
we budgeted an expense of $778,
thing.
and we budgeted
That's
revenue.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, we budgeted the expense high and the revenue at $399.
Question?
I'll make that motion.
Second?
Are you, sorry, John, you finished?
Second?
Who first?
Craig.
Then I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? There you go.
I would say too, state aid did come down a little bit last year, but my expectation is that it will increase this year because every pension plan in the Commonwealth had a really good 2-year window, and a lot of those plans don't need as much funding as they did before. And so that could free up some additional assets in the pool that gets spread out over everyone else. So I think the conservative estimate is good, but my hope, my expectation is it will be higher than it was last year. Which then you can decide in the fall, do you want to put that extra in or just fund your quarterlies? So,
I should also mention that the defined contributions that were made corresponding to the wages of the former manager have been forfeited and will be returned to the borough. I believe I got that email from Carrie yesterday. I believe it's about $50,000. That will be an amount that was not budgeted. It will be recorded as revenue, as a refund of prior year expenses.
okay.
Because he wasn't fully vested.
Correct. That's in accordance to the plan documents of those contributions
All right,
and
thanks.
forfeited. Next on the agenda would be cash update. All right, cash and investments at the end of January totaled $9,410,000. That is a decrease from the end of the year of $583,000. That's typical for the month of January where there's not significant revenue flow. There is one reimbursement that's pending from the DEP. That is a reimbursement for the leaf vac that was delivered and paid for in January. That reimbursement request is for $86,000. Together with the cash investments, our total cash investments would be $9,497,000. Those investments include 2 certificates of deposit that will be maturing on the 5th, which is Saturday. So by consensus, the committee agreed that taking the entire $4 million and change and rolling it into a 12-month CD was our best option. The 6-month proposal was at 0.15%. The 12-month proposal was at 0.45. So I've given VIST instructions to roll both CDs that are maturing on Saturday into one 12-month certificate of deposit. So I believe a motion is needed to ratify.
And you've got no issue with cash flow in your fund?
I don't, because we still have over $4 million in the ICS account.
So moved.
Second? Is there a second? Motion and a second to renew at the full $4 million at 12-month CD for 0.45. We're recommending council for that. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So be it.
Okay, so we did number 6, and we did number 7. So looking at results for the month of January. All right, transactions for the month of January, as I stated, there are no unusual receipts. Payments, payment to borough employees who have waived health insurance coverage. That's a semi-annual payment equal to 50% of the premium as adjusted by the collective bargaining agreements. There's different levels depending on the group. Those payments were made with the second pay of January and totaled $76,000. I'm sorry, 67. Payment was made to Lynx Computer for the purchase of 3 computer servers as budgeted. Payment was made to the Wyo Creek Stormwater Coalition for our MS4 commitment of $50,000. Payment was made to Scantech Info Management for $37,000. That was a down payment for the digital library project. Any comment on the progress there?
They will actually start next Wednesday. They're showing up to get the first batch of files out of the basement. They're gonna do the basement areas and the Goodman barn this year. That total between those areas is about $100,000, which is what we budgeted.
You get everything out of the Goodman barn?
Yep.
You're kidding me.
No, I'm not.
That place is a jam, we gotta find something to do with that. Okay.
All right, the annual payment was made to the Animal Rescue League in the amount of $11,000. That corresponds to the new census data, it was $1 per person. Payment was made to Security First for the fire station surveillance system.
Those cameras were installed this week and are up and running.
Excuse me, just to, back to the Animal Rescue League question for either of you, and that is, so now that we're officially participating in everything, there's no fighting and carrying on. If there are stray animals in the borough, they will come and get them?
Stray cats, stray dogs. I mean, typically the focus is more on dogs in terms of if our PD goes out on a call for either a dog or an area without a collar, or they respond to a domestic and there's an issue with an animal, yes, they will come here so our PD does not have to transport the animal there. They're not out actively searching for stray cats.
No, but I mean, at one time, they weren't even responding.
Oh, no,
You know,
I
part of the
had a
problem was
pretty,
the police would call and they wouldn't,
no, I had a pretty lengthy conversation, with their executive director at the end of 21 to spell out some concerns Chief Phillips had. And we were both satisfied with the answers we got from the ARL in terms
Okay.
of where they'll support us.
Thank you.
Well, there was a recent police report which said a puppy was running around and.
Yep.
Yeah, one time, I mean, when there was all that controversy going back and forth, we couldn't find an agency to come, you know, if the police were called, no one was responding to pick up the animals, so, I just wanna make sure that was taken care of.
Ask a quick question. Do they also come on private properties? I mean, if I have a raccoon in my attic.
No.
No, that would be pest control.
That's why
Just
we're
ask.
shotguns.
Let's move. And I saw you, Phyllis, you took the 50,000 for the MS4, you took that out of the
I
reserve.
did, yeah, we'll review that shortly. Payment was made on projects from 2021. Retainage was relieved for the 50/50 sidewalk program and for the sewer improvements, totaling $29,000. Additional sewer work, as Jim had discussed the need for in the fall, additional funds were added to the budget. The $1,500 is just supplies for the work that's about to begin on the Woodland Road area. Okay?
And everything in there was all part of the budget.
Yes. Okay. When we look at January results and we compare them to the prior 3 years, you'll see results are very comparable in terms of revenue and expenses. You can see they're all 800,000, so no real significant variance there. The same is true with the expenses. You can see they're all at 1,600,000. That is very typical for the month of January. The results for January has expenses in excess of revenue, $799,000.
Thanks for squeezing 4 years on there, Phyllis.
Yeah,
I think that's helpful.
we're gonna get to a point where I'm gonna
Well,
run out of
hopefully-
room, but.
Hopefully we get rid of some of these odd years and we can do true comparisons, so.
So when the 799 is added to the beginning of the year fund balance of 11 million, we have overall fund balance at the end of January of 10,221,000. 816 of that is reserved, leaving unreserved fund balance of 10,204,000. Pending activity, as I discussed, is a reimbursement from DEP for the leaf vac. There are also open permit fees of $1,900. So our overall fund balance, unreserved, at the end of January with the pending activity would be 10,292,000.
Can you just do one thing, just add one number there and just put just have a year end, our target for the year?
Okay,
Just what that target is where we budgeted that, it's like 9,100,000 or 8,900,000, whatever it is, just so we see it throughout the year where that's where we're headed.
all right, I'll make a note right at the bottom there.
Thank you. What's
Oh,
that?
Already
Yeah.
included in fund balance are receivables for utilities and general fund of 810,000. The reserves at the end of January, we started the year with reserves of 857,000. When we budgeted stormwater commitment over the next 4 years, it was an even 120 per year, so I'll be adding 10,000 per month. And the 50,000 reduction is the payment that was made to the Wyomissing Creek Stormwater Coalition.
Didn't we have to pay the cameras already?
The camera purchase was made last year. We received 23,000 in grant proceeds
Okay,
that were reserved for future camera costs.
okay.
The reduction of $980 was the installation of cameras on 2 of the vehicles.
So they're paid, so he said they were coming this week to be installed, but they're paid for. right?
They're paid.
Okay,
The installation is occurring, by vehicle as the schedule permits,
right.
and there'll be ongoing costs, and those grant funds,
You use
which
that.
was approximately 50% of the cost of the cameras, will be used to pay for future camera costs.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay?
That Stormwater Coalition funding, is there a specific project that is being done to spend?
There's 2 projects, one is Wyomissing Creek and the other is the Tulpehocken Creek. I can't speak to the details of those projects, I'd have to defer to the infrastructure committee and Jim. But we did receive an invoice from the Wild Creek Coalition asking for our 50,000.
Who has that money? Who,
The coalition has that money.
is the coalition an entity? I mean, I didn't know.
And it's my understanding that yes,
All right, so they have.
We had to sign a formal agreement to participate with them. Nick Johnson from GVC is their consulting engineer. I believe it's a group of about 10 municipalities, and my understanding is the current low-hanging fruit they're working on for the next round of MS4 approval is the detention basin behind Giant, Lowe's. It has a name that's escaping me at the moment, but
It's in Spring Township.
yes.
Good.
Tobahocken Creek, we're on our own.
Thank you.
all right, as we look at expenditures for the month of January, each of the items I discussed, I've lined up with our initial budget. The records management, the digital library, we had budgeted 137 was spent in January. The servers were replaced as budgeted. Expenditures were made for the Sonic Wall and Dado thus far, totaling $4,000. Did I miss a page? Fire station surveillance we talked about, the MS4 commitment we talked about. The projects that were tabled because we learned that funding was not available. The Brandywine Lincoln lining for $650,000, and also the Stonehouse master plan for $428,000. Those two projects total $1,078,000. That is the amount that was, the expense was budgeted, and so was the revenue that we had anticipated receiving. The net being $328,000. So as committees approve spending in excess of the budget as some of these projects materialize, my thought was to take the excess of $328,000 and eat away at that by the additional approvals. So the $10,000 reduction there corresponds to the library.
Yep. And in the same vein, any of these projects that come in under budget that are paid for, add that to that number as well.
So in the fall, the bids were open for the library totaling $48,000. There has been a change order approved by the infrastructure committee that will be before council next week for approval in the amount of $10,000, bringing that project to $58,000. So I've taken that $10,000 from 328, leaving 318 of that balance remaining for future projects. Is that proper presentation?
Yep, absolutely.
You're
Perfect.
okay with that?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, so for the month of January, capital expenditures against our budget totaled $154,000. Any questions about capital projects?
So we don't need to do anything with the air conditioning, that's already done by infrastructure.
Correct.
Which we still don't really have a good understanding as to why it's higher, but.
It is.
Is that all we need to know?
It is what it is.
Okay, if we look at the revenues for the month of January, the tax collector reports collections from December of $41,511. Those were collected by the tax collector and postmarked by the end of the calendar year, but received by the borough in January, so that is January revenue. With
What
those,
we talked about last month?
we had a partial amount,
Oh,
the final report was not yet available.
all right.
And Betsy may have reported that at council, I'm not certain. Okay. So with the December collections, total collections for 2021 were $4,525,000, leaving $65,000 uncollected and turned over to the county mid-January for collection. So those bills are now with the Tax Claim Bureau. That brings our collection percent to 98.5%, uncollected of about 1.5%, very comparable to prior years.
I was gonna ask, what did we budget actually?
We budgeted a lesser amount, I don't have those, but I can get that to you.
That's fine.
My-
I mean, we came in.
my
over-
December
we
dated-
Collected more than we budgeted,
For-
basically.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So with the collections of 41,000 from December, plus the related penalties of 4,000, $300 was received from the county for delinquent collections. The county did finally issue interim bills for 2021, and collections have started on those in the amount of $2,200 with corresponding discounts, so that net real estate taxes received by the borough in the month of January was $48,000. Okay, if we look at local taxes. Local taxes for the month of January, really not significant at $218,000. The largest collection being in the earned income tax. If we look at the detail of that number, we'll see, this is transfer taxes first. Transfer tax in the month of January was $60,000, mostly residential collections. 2 commercial properties we received tax on. One was for the charter school located on Penn Avenue, and one of the office complexes in the Ridgewood area for $8,500. If we look at the detail of the earned income tax, the amount received in December was lower than anticipated, and the amount that we're seeing in January is a spillover of that. It's all a matter of timing as to when they collect and process those monies. So we are off to a good start in that we are 99,000 ahead of where we were last year at this time.
So that's a good sign.
Oh,
People are back
that
to work.
includes February, which actually posted this morning, and the amount of
That's what
85,000.
it is, that's who bought it.
Well, but there's a difference.
I don't know.
Commonwealth Charter Academy.
It's just, I don't wanna growl up. Because we have no control.
Yeah, right.
It's too late, it's all right.
Yeah.
Well, it is, I got my rules,
Big, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
We have no control over the receipt of any of the local taxes.
right.
We do our best to guesstimate the timing of the receipt, but there's really no control over when they process it and when they remit it to the borough. For mercantile tax for the month of January, 12,000 was received. Way too early to indicate that that's a trend that will happen, just not enough information yet.
Yep.
And for LST, for the month of January, 7,000 was received, posted this morning for, February's 31,000. So we are on a good trend with 2 months, to reach the budget of 600 if that trend continues. All right, I think next on the agenda after results.
Does anybody have any questions for Phil for the January results, revenue or expenditures?
I have a question. On the real estate taxes, there's about a 15% increase from 2019 to 2021. I assume that at least some of that is due to increased assessed value in the borough.
That would be the reassessment of the Ninimek Mill area, the redevelopment. But that was greatly offset by decreases in value in the Heights Commercial District.
But there is a net increase.
There is a net increase, and we did raise taxes from 19 into 20.
But not by 15%.
No. Next on the agenda is the Tompkins Vist line of credit. Let me give you a little recap here. Michelle and I met with Vist lending officers on Tuesday and their attorney to ascertain the status of the current borrowing arrangement and talk about options for funding for future projects. So just to recap, we currently have no outstanding debt, but we do have available to us a note for $5 million at 3.5%. That note will mature in May of '22. So we just have a few months left on that. The Pennsylvania Debt Act does not permit municipalities to have open line of credits. Their debt must be tied to specific projects. So the $5 million actually originated as borrowing to fund the Borough Hall renovations, when that project was estimated to be $650,000. We actually wound up phasing that project and not needing to borrow, and then the 4th Street project came on the stage. So that note was renegotiated and assigned to the 4th Street extension. That was before we knew what grants were being awarded. As it turns out, we did not need to borrow on that line. The availability was there in case the grant fell short, or if we had cash flow difficulties while waiting for reimbursements. Those reimbursements occurred very timely, so there was not a need to draw on that line. So as we come up to the maturity date, we need to make a decision as far as renewing that instrument and assigning it to a different project, or letting that instrument mature and negotiate for something different. The recommendation is to let it mature and go for a new borrowing arrangement.
So do we think that we can renegotiate something less than 3.5%?
Already have.
Yes,
Okay.
we've already done that.
All right.
So when we look at the potential projects that are out there that are listed, what we had budgeted for 22 was just the Stonehouse Master Plan and the Brandywine Lincoln Stormwater, totaling $1,078,000. The projects that are really out there that are under consideration total $10 million. So
And
that's,
that's, not to interrupt you, Phyllis, I'm sorry, but when Phyllis and I talked through these numbers earlier this week, I'm seeing inflation on everything. So what we budgeted for and or cost estimates that came in 21, I'm adding dollars to, because we're not gonna put projects out to bid and actually see what the cost estimate was. And we've already seen that based off of the pole barn conversation that's coming up.
so the question or the topic for discussion is, what projects are we really interested in doing in the short term? What is our risk tolerance? How much fund balance do we want to use? How much do we want to finance with potential debt? And how do we want to structure that debt? There's different options. By the bank's recommendation, projects under $1 million can be written tax-free. Projects over $1 million, they recommend being, opposite.
Yes.
Opposite. Projects under $1 million are taxable documents, over $1 million tax-free. And there's really not a difference to how that works for the borough. I believe that status is tied to the instrument and the collateral supporting it. So there's different legal fees associated with creating those two instruments. Chris, if you could help me out between the tax and the tax-free.
Well, we need, to qualify under the Local Government Unit Debt Act for the tax exempt financing. And so there's more process involved in that and more expenses.
Some more upfront costs.
So at this time, Vist ran some numbers for us and communicated with Michelle late yesterday. That since we're looking at over $1 million, and we don't know what number that is right now, they're saying if we're able to act quickly within 45 days, that rate would be 2.5%, and the estimated legal fees would be $10,000. If we were to take a little longer, and we would actually execute this between March and towards the end of June, the rate would actually be 2.71. Legal fees being more expensive for the tax-free documents, because there's more involved in preparing them, a little bit less if we were to stay with the taxable, but then that would limit us to the dollar amount.
You would also end up with a likely higher interest rate, and I mean, in the grand scheme of things, if we're borrowing $1 million plus, the lower interest rate, I mean, we're gonna quickly
So
recoup those
offset
costs
the
anyway.
excess fees.
So are you suggesting you do it to 5 million or go to 10 million?
I was actually gonna suggest 7.5.
So I'm throwing it out there for discussion to gauge what your risk tolerance is,
Well,
what
we said if we're
projects
gonna-
we're really going to proceed with, and what is our real borrowing need.
I think the committee, you know, John said it too, that if we're gonna do this public works, we're gonna borrow the money for it, we're not gonna take it out of the fund. So, you know, I think that's the one that's sticking out there, that's all gonna be debatable as to, based on how much funding we end up getting and grants.
So along those lines, there is a whole host of federal grants that are gonna be opening up in the next few months. I've had a call last week and another call this week, and I'll have another one next week with Colleen and Kathy to kind of talk through different programs. So we already have $1 million we got from RFP for the Public Works Garage. That has an automatic 50% match, so $1 million from them, $1 million from us. RFP opens again at the end of February. We're gonna go back in with another $2 to $3 million request. So if we get that singular pot of money, again, whatever we receive, 50% match. I don't know if any of you saw the article in the Reading Eagle yesterday. The county's RFP process is going to open. We're gonna apply for that. However, in a conversation I had with Kevin Barnhart, one of the comments he made is if you come in specifically asking for dollars for a public works project, probably not gonna get it, but if you can pull out the public safety and environmental costs, so MS4, police evidence area, the salt shed, you stand a lot better chance. One of the things I've been talking to Jim Babb about is also the Berkshire Boulevard pump station. That's a sewer project. The Public Works garage and the portions of that that would potentially be eligible under the county and the Berkshire Boulevard project are two separate applications the way the county looks at it. So my recommendation is gonna be submit for both, let the county decide, which or either they want to fund. There's also the local share account through the state that we're gonna talk about a little bit further on the agenda. That we would apply for public works funding, that has no match. You can request up to $1 million. And then, again, I got a 7-page,
Horse racing thing.
yeah, breakdown sheet from the federal government of all of the potential programs that are opening through them. I actually have a meeting this afternoon with Dee Murray from West Riding to talk about one of the streets funding programs to see if we wanna do something together. So besides what's up here on the screen, I think there's possibly a potential for a few other projects we could look at funding. But Public Works alone, the low bid came in at $6.5 million last year. I had Phyllis bump that up to $7 million based off inflation. Until we actually put a shovel in the ground in '23, it could be higher than that. And if we get $3 million just from RACP, we're automatically on the hook for $3 million of our own funding.
So if we recommend to council that we increase this to 7.5 million and we're gonna get a rate of 2.5, it's gonna cost us $10,000 to initiate the paperwork.
Yes. And that's assuming we can act. What Pete said was, again, going back to Ron's presentation, the Fed's expected to raise the rate in March. So if we can get this deal done sometime in the next 30 to 45 days, we should be safe at 2.5. Otherwise, anticipate 2.71.
And when will that note mature? When will that mature?
I would believe another 2 years.
2 years.
I think this is intended as a bridge loan, in
Yeah.
fact, that, it helps you through the construction phase, and then once you've actually spent the money, you've got to replace it with permanent financing if you're gonna continue to borrow. And that the term on that will be longer, but I don't know what it will be. I don't know if you had any conversations about, if we were to use his credit and then in 3 years replace it with permanent financing, they don't know what the rates on that are gonna be.
No. And the other piece to add to this is we were really fortunate with DCED reimbursement, like Phyllis said. They were very quick, like turnaround in a week. We've never dealt with any of these other entities that could potentially be funding money. So, is it pay everything up front, reimbursement 100% at the end of the project? Is it piecemeal? Is there process for reimbursement lengthier and more burdensome than what we've dealt with?
DEP money I'm waiting for, it could be a month, it could be 8 months. You just never know with some of these agencies.
Okay, does the committee have any thoughts or suggestions or discussion?
I still like to lay out what this costs us over what period of time. I mean, that $7 million eventually is gonna come out of the fund balance.
Well, yeah, I think this is, I don't think this
As far as
is,
the loan.
I don't think the discussion has anything to do with the individual projects. It's a
No,
question of-
I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah, no, I think, yeah, absolutely.
What are
Before
the
you-
upfront costs? What
Yep.
are this first one?
Yeah,
I
But
absolutely.
the
would like to see
attorney's
that.
fees are estimated at
10,000.
Or
10,000.
10, yeah, so.
The interest is only paid
If you
on
borrow.
the outstanding balance.
Yeah.
So there's no
Yeah, I
cost.
think,
So
Right.
there's no cost for the $5 million we've had in place that we did not borrow. I think we paid $9 in interest for the time that the attorney fee was unpaid for 3 days or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah, I don't think we're moving forward with any of those projects until we see a breakdown of where we're getting the funding. And we pretty much said that unless we get more funding for the public works facility, that's just gonna be put on hold for. So it seems reasonable to have the dollars available to us, especially at that rate, especially for a gap in case we do need it, in case we do all of a sudden get some funding, and we can move forward with some of these projects.
And knowing there's a small window of time before the rate's gonna likely go up and not come back down.
Right.
So there is a DCD approval required, there's advertising, there's resolutions, so a 45-day window really is not a lot of time.
That doable, Chris?
Yeah, but you have to get started.
So it'll be a borough council meeting next. So is there a recommendation or a motion to move this to council for approval? Greg,
Go ahead.
second? John? favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we'll recommend to council to move forward with securing a $7.5 million line of credit at a 2.5 rate that needs to be
And so
ratified
We
within.
don't wanna call it a line of credit.
What are we gonna call
Boroughs
it?
are not permitted to have lines of
Okay,
credit.
what are we gonna call it?
For those
Bridge.
projects.
Bridge
Bridge
loan.
loan,
For those potential projects.
potential projects. A potential loan for potential projects. Okay, right.
But the legal fees aren't potential
No.
No.
These are-
or transitory.
Yep, exactly. What did we pay to get that note? Was that another
So
10,000?
we paid, 7,500, and that was in 2020.
Inflation.
This rate's went up.
No, so
That was a taxable, so the
Oh.
paperwork was not as extensive.
Okay. And why are we doing this versus a tax?
lower interest rate.
Oh, because of the lower interest rate.
And if anyone's curious, Doug Rouch from Georgiana Setley is the attorney that we met with, and that it sounds like would be preparing the paperwork.
Who is it?
Doug Rouch?
What would the rate have been if we would have stayed with the same program? Instead of non-tax?
3.5,
3.5.
yeah. And really, that fits the projects under $1 million. We're looking at more than that.
Okay. Next.
The local share account statewide grant, I asked Chris's office to prepare a resolution for council to adopt next Tuesday, which he is in the process of working on. This is one of those grant pots of funding. It receives money from the casinos all throughout Pennsylvania. The host municipality gets a cut, the county gets a cut, and then anything left over goes into this pot. So projects can be funded up to $1 million. Construction counts as an eligible project. No match requirement. The resolution is necessary to authorize the borough to apply for it, and then also authorize Phyllis and I to execute any documents related to it.
What project is this?
Public Works.
So the objective here obviously is to gather as many of these $1 million grants and.
And with
whatever.
little match dollars,
Right, exactly. Okay. Is there a, we need a motion to move this on to council?
So moved.
Second? Greg, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, move that on to council. American Recovery Plan?
All right, just to recap where we are, because this has been under discussion for a lengthy time. The American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 established the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. Those funds were received by the borough. Tranche number 1 was received in June of 21 in the amount of $556,000. That amount was unbudgeted and recognized in revenue, so that was part of our excess revenue in 2021. An equal amount is anticipated in June of 22. That amount was budgeted. Okay? Total receipt by the borough, $1,113,000. There's been a lot of documentation. There is interim rules, there were final interim rules. The final rule was issued on January 7th. Becomes effective April 1st. The document's 437 pages, if anyone's interested in reading it. The overview of the final rule is 44 pages. Again, if you're interested in reading it, I'd be happy to forward that to you. What you see on the screen is an excerpt from the overview. Make that a little bit bigger for you. It basically establishes a standard allowance of $10 million. So that the amount received by the borough falls well below that. And it takes away the need to assign the spending of that money to a specific project because we fall below the standard allowance of $10 million. All we need to do is demonstrate that we're using those funds for services generally provided by the local government. There's reports that need to be completed. Michelle's already established the account. The reports are not yet available. They'll be available before the April deadline. And we'll have to go on and we'll have to say that we spent that money for general government purposes. We could use the entire amount and just put it in police wages or fire wages, It will be very easy to document the use of those funds. We have to avoid deposits into the pension funds, debt service, and satisfaction of settlements and judgments. He's already done. So it's really by instituting that standard allowance of $10 million, it's really made our reporting and our requirements very simple.
So these funds are just part of the general
They're
fund now,
just
they're just
part of the
moving
general
on,
fund.
so they're
To
no
be
longer,
used-
we're not treating them separately
We
anymore.
don't have to worry about what project it's assigned to and whether it meets certain criteria.
So just make the paperwork as simple as possible, apply it to something that you can do the
So
least
it's
amount of
a- so it's a
paperwork as
broad-
possible and
broad term.
move on.
Classic example of politicians making it sound like something impossible to handle, and then they figure out they can't do it either.
Yep,
Just make it easy,
yep,
as opposed to just starting out making it easy.
perfect.
Okay, so that's the update on the American Recovery Plan. Now we're talking about the pole barn.
Can you bring up the McCarthy cost estimate? So when we were talking budget last year, $150,000 was put into the 2022 budget for anticipated cost to put a pole barn out by the existing Parks barn. To refresh your memory, McCarthy's office did a structural analysis of the existing Parks barn. It is structurally unsafe to store heavy equipment in. There's also issues with rodents getting in, running across and through the area where employees take their lunch breaks. So Dan Macrina talked to Pioneer Pole Building, got the cost estimate for $150,000, and like everything else, inflation impacted that number. So the new number we're looking at just for the building and, MEP, so mechanical, electrical, plumbing, $228,841. There's additional site work that's gonna be necessary, ENS controls, and a very small amount for stormwater management.
I get that inflation went up and materials went up, but going from 150,000 to 265,000, it's like, inflation didn't go up that much.
But you know what, in construction, I recently got involved in something like that, it almost doubled.
Yeah, I mean, the
From
prices-
July, just from this past
It
July.
just seems like such a huge.
It's
jump.
ridiculous, but that's what's happening out there.
So Pioneer has confirmed that 228,841 is not gonna budge. They've locked in that number regardless of whether we execute the quote tomorrow or in October. So, this number should not be subject to further changes, but obviously, yes, the total number is 115 higher than what was budgeted.
So that's an amount we could take out of the
Yeah.
remaining 318,000.
Right.
And I just want to keep track of that so we
Oh,
don't
yeah,
keep
no,
going back into it
Absolutely, you
and
got to.
overuse it.
Yep, absolutely.
Listen, the only thing I can tell you is if you haven't gone out to that barn out there, you gotta go visit. I mean, they can pull trucks in, and they have, I don't know, 4 inches on the front and 2 inches in the back of it to get them in. They-
Without
and
backup
we're-
cameras?
And we are, we're kicking the can down the road, rightfully so, on the bigger project over near Ole. I just think this is something, we keep buying bigger trucks, we get bigger stuff, we gotta find a place to put it and protect those things.
The only other comment I had when I looked at it is, it looks small. If we're gonna spend this money, making it big enough to really do what you need it to do for future, probably doesn't cost that much more when you're doing it. So, when you look at the size of it, I was surprised how small it is. It's like 50 by 28 or something like that.
There,
It just looks small.
I can reconfirm with Dan, but my understanding, they actually had a site meeting with Pioneer, Dwayne Hammond, who's the parks foreman, and Dan Macrina to kind of evaluate existing equipment and trucks, the stuff that's in the budget that's coming that they know that they're getting, and make sure everything fits. Some of the lighter equipment can go in the existing parks barn on that grade level floor, if you wanna call it that, with the balance of it going over here, and there's 2 truck bays in the existing parks barn that they could continue to use. The existing trucks fit in there.
Yeah, I think Steve's right. So, do do we have a recommendation to move this to council to recommend the additional expenditure and taking it out of the dollars that we already budgeted for projects that we know we're not gonna do?
So moved.
Second?
Your turn.
Discussion? Discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Just to clarify, this has not been bid, we have a firm quote, but.
We don't need to bid it, they're in CoStars.
Okay. So this is, all right, the whole package is CoStars.
Yep.
Are you suggesting that we bid it?
I would say the engineering fees you're gonna pay just to get the bid documents
Yeah, we're
together.
gonna spend a chunk of money.
To bid it?
Yeah.
So it's probably not worth it.
And it's on CoStar, so we're good.
Yeah, you don't have to bid it if it's
Right.
on coasters. I mean, it's just weird to me. I think of, you know, cars and trucks being coasters, but, you know, building project, they prepackaged all the costs. It's a coasters project.
Probably because it's a pool building and not an office building.
You know, we're gonna hear when that gets built about the people, how it doesn't look nice out there, all that. We're gonna hear about it, but it's obviously the right thing to
Do
do.
you want input on, and Dan and I are meeting probably early next week to look at the tin samples for the exterior color,
Make it camouflage.
so the deer blend into it?
Yeah.
There you go.
Just make it match.
Okay, so we get that. There was a recommendation passed on to finance from the personnel committee that approved a reorg chart for the administration, office administration people. Along with that, there was rate adjustments, all of which were well within the budget, just a rearranging of those rates and salaries. But it needed to be approved by finance, so I will make a recommendation to approve the personnel committee's recommendations and move it on to council. Is there a second? Second? Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
So, in dealing with the rec board and Parks and Rec in general, there's 3 departments that actually have social media accounts. Parks and Rec, Police Department, and Fire Department. Parks and Rec specifically, there were a lot of hands in the pot in that rec board members had access to the Facebook page. And in talking through all of the possible things that could go wrong with that, it made sense that the borough adopt some type of social media policy spelling out specifics. This is also coming out of a request from the Student Advisory Committee of the Rec Board to start using other social media platforms such as Instagram. So working with Chris's office, Dan actually pulled a couple of drafts of social media policies from other municipalities. Melissa and I made some changes, sent it over to Chris's office polished it. I do spell out 2 points that I wanna meet in this draft policy. It spells out account managers, so effectively the Parks and Rec director, the fire chief, and the police chief are serving as the account managers. Those 3 people must approve any content that's being posted before it's posted. And it also spells out under purpose and objective, that's the second page. Right there, stop. Second paragraph from the bottom, what the purpose of posting for those 3 departments on their social media channels is. So anything they post has to tie into those categories. It's not just, willy-nilly. So again, Melissa and I have been trying to focus on areas we don't have policies that we see a need. Things have not gone awry yet, but we believe it's only a matter of time until that could potentially happen. So this will help spell out who's responsible for what and what types of things should be on any borough-related social media channels.
So I tried to read through it, read through part of it, and at least the tech. So it's not just the fire chief, the police chief, and the rec board. Other people can post it, but they have to approve it.
Correct. I mean, what Chief Phillips said to me is, a lot of their information, he's calling from different people in the department, same with the fire department. There's one or two specific people that will actually be going onto, say, Facebook and posting it, but John's approving the content, or Colin's approving
They're
the
not the ones that
content.
actually have to do it. When I read it, I interpreted it that they were the only ones allowed to post, but if other people, but they're approving it, other people can have
Well,
access.
other people can prepare content, but it has to be approved by these.
In the case of the police department, everything that goes through, I believe it's Crime Watch, automatically gets on the police department's Facebook page.
Anybody want to discuss this?
I read it.
I mean, is
Yeah.
there any, I guess, as long as this is like a borough type thing, a person can go out and do anything on social media they want to outside of this,
Correct.
freedom of speech.
This is strictly
So
for
this is strictly for
borough-owned.
internal-
Borough owned.
We
Yes,
have,
okay,
It's
that's
for our
fine,
posting.
yes,
we have a different policy in the employee handbook about
for that other stuff.
that stuff.
Okay, that's fine. Just wanted to make sure.
This is just for the borough's own social media
Right, that's fine.
activities.
And I should also note, there's language in here, the intent of posting things on social media, we're not engaging in a back and forth discussion. Preferably comments will be turned off so people can't comment on certain things, but it's not for anyone, borough employee wise, to be sitting on Facebook all day and responding to comment
Right,
section
sure.
to a post.
Okay.
So we have to move this on to Borough Council. So is there a motion to move this on to Borough Council?
I'll motion.
Second? Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. So we'll move that on to council for Tuesday. And you're fine with it, Chris? Yes. Okay. Any other old business? Hearing none, is there any new business to be brought before the committee?
I'd like to make
John?
a comment, yeah. I just thought it would be appropriate to acknowledge Paul Brass in the meeting. I knew he was here for a long time, but I didn't know that he served on so many different things at this borough for 43 years, 30 on finance, or as treasurer. And I just wanted to share my gratitude for having been able to serve with him. He was a mentor for me on this committee specifically, and was always just a really firm but guiding hand, and dedicating his service and his time and his energy to the community, which I think is an exemplary. We're all volunteers on the boards and the committees, and there's no compensation coming our ways, and he served with dedication and commitment, and was an example, I think, for all of us. So I just wanted to acknowledge him publicly during the meeting.
Can you add that to the notes, Melissa, and for the council meeting, and we'll bring that up at the council meeting also,
Yeah.
expressing John's views, as well as adding the committee's views to it.
We, the borough, typically when a council member, former elected or appointed official passes away or there's a death in the immediate family, we, send flowers or something to the funeral. In light of his obituary saying that they preferred a donation be made to that specific charity, a donation was made, I believe, in the last check run in his honor on behalf of the borough.
Great.
I put that in there too, Melissa, so we mentioned that at the council.
Yeah, true public servant.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah. Any other new business? Entertain a motion to adjourn?
Second.
I promise I will be following up.
Sure.